Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me today for the very first episode, Reading Michael. I'm your host, Lena, and I'm very excited to be here with you today to kick off this journey, this new way for me to explore my love, Michael Jackson, and to share it with you and hopefully find some common ground in understanding this man that fascinates so many of us, enough to record this podcast and also enough to listen to it. So thank you for being here. As I said, I am a massive fan of Michael Jackson, but I was a little late to the game, I'll be honest. I have, of course, spent my life hearing about Michael Jackson, knowing about Michael Jackson. I was born in the bad era. So, of course, I grew up with Michael Jackson in the cultural zeitgeist, so to speak. And he just kind of escaped me, honestly. I was interested in different things, and it wasn't until, believe it or not, 2021, December maybe of 2021, when I stumbled upon his performance videos and social media, and I was instantly transfixed, and I have not looked back since. My passionate fandom and interest in him and incredible enthusiasm for him has led to a lot of wonderful friendships, connections, and experiences, both in exploring his artistry and his humanity as a person and all the many layers and complications of his life, but also in connecting with the fan community. So I have enjoyed, as a fan, consuming so much fan-created content, from the most kind of casual edits and things from 15 years ago on YouTube to the very current podcasts that are being created right now, and ways in which fans internationally talk about and explore their love for Michael Jackson. So I have long wanted to, identify a project that I am interested in pursuing to explore my own love for him. And while I have many in the works, many that are not prepared to be discussed or shared until much further in the future, for now, I had an idea to make a podcast in which I am doing my best to read Michael Jackson. And what I mean by that, it's a multi kind of layered meaning. I mean, I am interested in understanding Michael Jackson. I'm interested in deciphering Michael Jackson, and from his own words, from his own expressions, his own creative output, as well as the words of others. But what really incited my desire to start this project was that, just for fun, I recorded myself reading one of his poems from Dancing the Dream, his book so many of us as fans have read. And I sent it to a friend, and she enjoyed hearing it so much that I had the thought, maybe this is something I could do. Maybe I could create a podcast in which I sit with his work, share his work, and maybe even briefly discuss his work, not highlighting my own interpretation over his words, but just offering from one fan's perspective to whoever else may want to listen to this. So I decided to do that. I so enjoyed the slowed down experience of reading one of the pieces from his collection to my friend. And I enjoyed how much more I got out of it by giving myself that time and space to do it. So I thought this would be a beautiful way for me to reconnect with this book, which I've read a couple of times now, but never in such a slow and methodical way. I have a lot to say about this book. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this book. I am extremely excited to reread it and to do it with you. So if you are interested in joining me for this, I think it's going to be a great experience. So get cozy, get comfortable. I will be focusing the first season, possibly the only season of this podcast, on Michael Jackson's book, Dancing the Dream. So this is episode 1, and we're going to get right into it. So when I first became a fan of Michael, I instantly, like I said, I was instantly obsessed and felt the need to consume content about him and learn more about him. Every waking moment of my life. For those of you who are listening to this, presumably if you're listening to this, you understand that experience. But for me, it was like an obsession like none I've ever had before. I was just completely entranced by him as a human being, from his incredible talent as an artist to the duality of his self-presentation, where he is this very gentle, soft-spoken being in day-to-day life and face-to-face and one-on-one, but then is this absolute dynamite on stage with this incredible explosiveness and his energy and his power and his rawness. And that is so enticing and interesting to me as a fan. And then there's so many other layers. Of course, there's the things we all hear about Michael Jackson. And I thought I had some understanding of who he was prior to becoming a fan. And it was only when I really encountered him through the lens many years later, after he had passed away, when I encountered him again and began to see him in a completely different way than I had ever perceived him in the past. Maybe, I don't know if it was my own maturity or if it was the fact that, outside of the time and space of the very, invasive media of the 80s and 90s and 2000s, without that lens to frame every single thing about him that I saw or read, I was able to develop my own perception of him in a much more clear-eyed way. And suddenly this person who seemed so confusing when I was young no longer seemed very confusing to me, and actually became just fascinating to me because of the depth that I saw him carrying within everything he did, and that I had never encountered before with him. So of course, early on in my fandom, I turned to some different fan spaces and I asked for fan recommendations of ways that I could also learn about Michael. What books, what documentaries. And of course, I got lists and lists of suggestions, but the ones that stuck out to me the most were the books he himself wrote. Now, of course, I ran to Moonwalk, his autobiography, which was published in 1988. I ran to that as quickly as I could and read it, devoured it within the first month of my fandom. And then, of course, I bought Dancing the Dream. Dancing the Dream is Michael's collection of poetry and reflections, as he calls it. And they're all pieces that in some way seem to represent something about him and his worldview. And what I really like about this is that Michael has himself said that Dancing the Dream is far more autobiographical and far more representative of who he is than Moonwalk ever was. And as an artist myself, as a poet and writer, I understand that. I understand how sometimes the abstract can actually be far more personal than the incredibly confessional. So I'm really excited to spend time with this book again. I first encountered it and I looked through it when I first got it, and I was in love because there's all these beautiful pictures of him throughout and from all different stages of his younger life, up until the time it was published in 1992. And I really enjoyed that. But I also had the sense that to an onlooker, from the outside, you could easily see this book and think of it almost as like a coffee table book. If you don't look closely at it, because there's so many pictures, there's so much gloss, and again, it's beautiful. This isn't a criticism, it's beautiful. But I can see people buying this as a collector's item and not necessarily buying it to really read it and get to know Michael. I imagine some element of why he decided to publish this with so many photos and making it a photo book essentially is to increase the curb appeal, so to speak, for fans of all ages and from all languages and backgrounds. And I completely understand the reasoning for that. And I don't fault him for that at all. But I do like the idea of taking time to really focus on the words, because his photos and his imagery can be distracting, and I think it's nice to spend the time really with the words inside. So this book, Dancing the Dream, starts with a dedication page as well as an introduction from Elizabeth Taylor. I'm not going to read the introduction from Elizabeth Taylor because I want to focus on Michael's words, at this point at least. I want to focus on his words. So with this first episode, which will likely be a bit longer than those to come, I want to start with just reading the very beginning of this book, kind of setting the tone. When you open Dancing the Dream, you see in script the title, Poems and Reflections Written by Michael Jackson. Dedicated to Mother with Love, he writes. Deepak, thank you for your inspiration and your love. This is, I believe, dedicated in that to Deepak Chopra, who is the spiritual, metaphysical type of writer, self-help type of writer. I know he's very popular in the United States, at least. I've read some of his work, actually. And he had a friendship with Michael Jackson that is very interesting to read about, actually. If you've read The Art of Compassion, the book about Earth Song written by Joe Vogel, he talks a little bit about Michael's relationship to Deepak and references Deepak saying that Michael was one of the most enlightened beings he's ever met. So we're going to start with the very first piece. And it's the title piece called Dancing the Dream. So without further ado, Dancing the Dream. Consciousness expresses itself through creation. This world we live in is the dance of the Creator. Dancers come and go in the twinkling of an eye, but the dance lives on. On many an occasion when I am dancing, I've felt touched by something sacred. In those moments, I've felt my spirit soar and become one with everything that exists. I become the stars and the moon. I become the lover and the beloved. I become the victor and the vanquished. I become the master and the slave. I become the singer and the song. I become the knower and the known. I keep on dancing, and then it is the eternal dance of creation. The Creator and creation merge into one wholeness of joy. I keep on dancing and dancing and dancing until there is only the dance. I think this is a really beautiful way to start this book, Dancing the Dream. Not only, of course, because it is the title piece of the collection, but because I think so much of this captures the essence of Michael. Of course, we all associate him with dance. The entire world associates him with dance. In that way, that makes sense. On a surface level, anyone looking at this, seeing a book by Michael Jackson called Dancing the Dream, that makes sense. But I think he's doing something deeper here. I think by comparing himself to these contradictory experiences, or these seemingly contradictory experiences, the victor and the vanquished, the master and the slave, the singer and the song, he's kind of talking about that mutuality that exists, that kind of power dynamic, that balance that is present in so many areas of our lives, where we're both the giver and the taker. And then he's talking about that in light of this greater mythos of creation, this greater kind of cosmic energy of it all, this spiritual connection. And as I was reading this and thinking about this piece, I started to think about this TED Talk I actually saw years ago that I actually still use in my classes now when I teach. This TED Talk called, Is There More to Life Than Being Happy? And the premise of this TED Talk is to talk about how, yes, there is, and how pursuing meaning in life is one of the most important things that we can get to have a fulfilling life. Happiness is, part of that, of course, but pursuing meaning will give us a greater sense of fulfillment and a well-lived life. And one of the points made in this is how one of these pillars to finding meaning in our lives is this concept of transcendence. And this is a concept that the speaker discusses how through religion, through spirituality and beliefs, through art, we can all experience moments of transcendence. And creation is a big part of that. Transcendence being when we kind of leave the regular plane of existence and we kind of find ourselves lost in time and space, just completely absorbed in a higher level and plane of thinking than we're typically accustomed to day to day. I would think of it almost as a hyper presence. And it's something I try to work on and struggle with a great deal. But I think what he's talking about here is a kind of transcendence. That feeling of being completely connected to the Creator, being the Creator yourself, being all things at once. The wholeness of one thing, as he calls the wholeness of joy. When he says, I keep on dancing and dancing and dancing until there's only the dance. What I think that means and how I interpret that is like you put something out there and the things we put out there and leave linger and stay much longer than we do, but they continue to exist. Our ego, our identity within it is only one part of it, but it is not the whole of it. It exists separate of us. And this is really consistent with a lot of things that he would say about his own work, his own creativity and art. But it also seems consistent with his own perspectives on life from the things that we have heard about him, the things we have heard him say. The beliefs that he carried about oneness and love and universality and connection between all people and nature and God. These are all consistent with who many of us fans know him to be. But if you haven't read Dancing the Dream, or if a person hasn't read Dancing the Dream, we've only had a surface level understanding of it. This book goes much deeper into his beliefs and his philosophies in life. So I hope that if it interests you, you decide to stick around and come back for our next episode. How I hope to and plan to format this will be every week I'll read a poem and I'll have a brief discussion afterward about it, highlighting the work as the most important thing here. So thank you so much for joining me today for this very first episode, and I look forward to reading Michael with you again.